Hello, I'm Kurt Lidke, Executive Director of Klamath Film, and you just watched This Is Tim, A Musical Life, a loving tribute to a fascinating man who meant so much to so many in our Northern Features category for the Klamath Independent Film Festival. Joining us now is the director of this fascinating film, someone who knows Tim Ellis as much as anyone, his daughter, Tiffany Ellis. Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Kurt. Thanks so much for having me.
This film is a beautiful tribute to your dad. So, at what point did you decide that you were going to make a film about your dad? Was it while he was still alive or after he had passed away?
Um, it was actually after he'd passed away. It all happened so quickly. From the time of his diagnosis to him passing away, it was only about 2 months. And we were all just sort of in this whirlwind. And at that time, this birthday concert happened, and it was my real first exposure to the level of um, just the amount of impact he'd made on our local community. And so at the time, of course, I wasn't thinking about a film. I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was just thinking about spending time with my dad while we still had him around. But after he'd passed away, I'd stayed connected with a lot of these people who'd been reaching out to us while he was sick, and started to hear a lot of stories about how he touched people's lives, or a single moment that they'd encountered with him sort of changed the course of their career or inspired them to do something that maybe they hadn't felt confident doing before. And so it was really in the weeks and months following just hearing these stories, I realized there was so much more to my father that I didn't know. And also, I felt like there was a opportunity to share his story with a lot of other people, and hopefully, inspire those other sort of everyday heroes in our lives to continue to inspire others and educate others and sort of make our own communities better every day.
Your film hits really close to home in several aspects for me. First of all, like many people in Oregon, I knew your dad. In fact, I have a photo from when I booked Jim and Tim at my college in Arizona many years ago. And whenever I made it to Portland, I'd always try to catch Jim and Tim performing, and your dad would always remember me, come up and give me a gigantic bear hug. The guy wasn't tall, but he had some major strength to him because Tim hugs were suffocating. It also hits home because our dads were very similar in the way that they impacted so many. My dad was a teacher, not a musician, but the fact that I'm actually working on my own documentary right now, trying to give justice to my dad's story because he also passed away a couple of years ago, and he was very much so cut from the same cloth in many respects, and we tragically lost him. And I'm curious how difficult it was to make this film because it has been for me. In one respect, being family, you know the subject matter better than anybody, but because you're so close, how do you film and edit footage without just becoming a big crying, blubbering mess with every scene?
Yeah. Well, first, I'm so sorry for your loss. Obviously, I know how horrible it is to lose a parent, especially somebody who's such a bastion in the community. Um, we're so lucky to have gotten the experience to be their child, as
Right.
pithy as that sounds. Um, and I think the process of making this film has been beautiful and horrible. And I'm sure you're going through a lot of the same emotions that
Yeah.
I through.
Yeah.
Um, it's funny because you're right. Being so close to the subject matter, um, I think, is a tremendous advantage because it's an insight that I can share that not everybody else has. So as a storyteller, it's a really unique place to be. But it's also a really difficult place to be because you can really get stuck in that cocoon. And so the first thing for me was to make sure that I was working with an editor who had no connection to him, no connection to Portland music. You know, she is an amazing editor, but had no idea about any of this sort of scene at all. So I felt like when maybe I would have these moments where I was really kind of stuck in the sentimental, um, or just having a hard time seeing the big picture. Um, she really helped pull me out of that and provided me another perspective. And we would still have our conversations and challenge each other and make decisions. Um, But yeah, I mean, many hours of being a blubbering mess in the edit room for sure. There's still scenes. I mean, by the time you finish a film, you've seen your film probably, I mean, thousands of times at this point. There's still scenes that set me off, like
Mm-hmm.
every single time I cry, because it takes me back to that moment, and then it takes me back to all these other moments where I've shared it with others, and they've had similar emotional responses to the same scene. So in some ways, it compounds the grief because you're experiencing it again over and over. Um,
It's almost
but
like the PTSD of re-experiencing that
yeah,
constantly, self-inflicted PTSD.
yeah. But I think at the same time, having having the opportunity to have talked to so many people that he impacted and who impacted him, and I have childhood memories about so many of these musicians. Like, I've known Jim Walker since I was probably, I don't know, 10. um, a lot of these musicians I grew up with, you know they were rehearsing with my dad in the basement, or they're rushing off to a gig, and so being able to talk with them about this shared person that we care about and love and are grieving was also really, personally such a growth moment, and just help give me more perspective and help me kind of deal with the loss and process the loss and celebrate him every day. And in fact, I would say one of my hardest days from the moment I started working on the film, which is about 3 months after he passed away, from the moment I started working on the film, I felt like he was still with us, but I experienced a new sense of loss the day we locked picture, because I heard his voice every day. I saw his face every day. I was helping, like, tell this story for other people every day. And then the day we locked picture, and it's like, okay, great, we're going to take a break. We're going to, like, deal with all the final finishing and all of that. Cool. Editor, thank you so much. Amazing job. Talk to you soon. The next day, it just felt like a renewed sense of loss because he wasn't there with me anymore. So it's so hard. It's so hard going through that process. But at the same time, now I have this thing that I can share with people. And it's
Right.
amazing to share it with people who knew him. But it's also great to introduce brand new people who know nothing about him. And they kind of get a little taste of what he was like and the impact that he had. And that has been a huge gift. So the pain and the blubbering and the feelings of grief and all of the pain of going through that process feels really worthwhile, just to be able to share his story and continue to get his voice out there.
I could see a lot of value in having an editor who's totally disconnected in the process, because there may be things that you feel are super important and they say this has no coherent aspect in the story arc, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there's no reason for this to be in here, but it's personally, important to me. Yeah, but it's personally important only to you and your
right.
siblings. It doesn't matter
Yeah,
to the audience.
yeah.
So
And it can be hard sometimes to realize that, where you're like, no, this one thing that feels so pivotal and important to me doesn't fit in, just the arc of the story, or maybe isn't as impactful to somebody who knows nothing about the dynamics of our family, or whatever it is. So yeah, I mean, sometimes it was a harsher reality to have to encounter. But just so smart, and Beth was really just having an empathetic but critical eye on the work, just really made the project, just took it to a different level for me. Because if I had been the one really making all the decisions in the edit room and, like, being the one cutting the film, it would have been a very, very different film.
the director's cut would have been like 4 or 5 hours long too,
Exactly,
right?
exactly. My brother was like, "Why don't you have more uncut concert footage in there?" And I'm like, "Well, because it's not like a concert movie necessarily, So, and my brother would have made a completely different film because his experience with my dad and his experience as a musician, and his perspective is just so different from mine, and the story that he would tell about my dad is so different. It would be much more about music theory and all of those crazy riffs he could always just play, and that's what his film would be about. So that's what's so fun, I guess, about being a filmmaker telling such a personal story, is that it is a personal story, and literally my brother, who grew up in the same household as me, would tell a wildly different tale. So look out for his film coming who knows when.
You did have a lot of family appear in the film, but did anyone outright refuse to be on camera, or were like, no, we don't want to talk about that story there? Because the film does get very personal.
Yeah. Nobody was particularly like, oh, I absolutely under no circumstances want to be a part of this. Everybody is very supportive. Obviously I come from a really big family, and some decisions had to be made about how many of us would get a storyline. So it made the most sense, obviously, to have my brother be such a pivotal part of the movie, because he's the only other musician, and he's also my dad's namesake, and so there are sort of layered elements there. Whereas some of my other siblings didn't have as much of that connection to the specific storyline we were telling in the film. So yeah, they were fine with me shooting or using all of our home movies and that kind of a thing. I did run certain things by certain siblings. I'm like, okay, Jill, I've got you being a super teenager glaring at mom. Is that okay? She thought it was hilarious. So luckily my family was all pretty much down for the experience. And my mom was a real trooper, because she was going through her own loss with him. I mean, they were together for so long, and such an important part of each other's lives, and so I think sitting down with her and being able to talk with her was difficult for her a lot of the time, and she's even more so than me not comfortable in front of cameras. So yeah, she didn't need convincing, but I think it was definitely a difficult process for her to get in front of the camera and try to speak honestly about some of those experiences and stuff. So yeah. Always very supportive, but at the same time, just it's vulnerable sharing stories that are that personal and about somebody that you've just lost. But yeah, I mean, my family's been amazing throughout this whole process, and I was always the one kid with the video camera on my shoulder, like the big massive VHS, and so I don't think anybody was particularly surprised when I was like, I think I want to tell Dad's story, and can I use some home movies with you guys in it?
Did you have the Panasonic?
Oh my gosh, that is a blast from the past. I was really hoping there was one shot that I found in our home movie collection, because we have hundreds of hours of home movies, and I cataloged all of them for this project. And there was one shot of me in the mirror, very meta, but I couldn't use it. I couldn't find a way to figure out how to use it.
You have a ton of musicians that appear in this film talking about the impact that Tim had from a musical level. Some world famous, some more locally famous. How did you manage to coordinate so many different musicians to appear in the film? Was that easy, where everyone wanted to come on camera and participate, or did you have to go through management and all that to line things up?
Yeah, it depends. Some people were very close friends with my dad, and so I had a direct line to them. And we're happy to connect and happy to chat, and others, yeah, I'd have to go through a couple of channels to get to them. But it's funny, the moment I've actually had a chance to have a conversation with the artists, immediately they're like, absolutely, anything for Tim Ellis. So it was scheduling the interviews is sometimes tricky around touring schedules and that kind of a thing, but I was really lucky that everybody wanted to talk about my dad. He was a great guy, and it was funny because Art Alexakis was one of my first interviews, and I'd met him a couple of times, as a teenager or something, and had no real like connection with him. But I was on the phone with him to kind of pitch the idea and see if he was open to it. And the very first thing, get on the phone. I'm like, hi, I'm calling. This is Tiffany Ellis and Tim Ellis's daughter. So and so gave me your number. And he goes, oh yeah, you're the daughter who went to Oxford and then became a Zumba instructor, right? And I was like, because I have my master's degree from Oxford University. I ended up moving to Australia. I worked in Indigenous filmmaking for a long time, and also just happened to teach fitness. And my dad had distilled it to the like, she has her Oxford degree and now teaches Zumba in the Outback. So, I think people really connected with my dad, and because he talked a lot about us, I think a lot of these musicians also felt like they kind of knew me as well, um, which made it way easier to like get them involved in the project and have them talk about my dad.
Growing up with a father that was in such high demand is something I understand. I can't tell you how many times that we were somewhere and my father would run into a former student or a friend and we'd spend half an hour waiting for them to wrap up the conversation. We're all in the car and we just have to figure, okay, if we're going to go out for dinner, we got to add an extra half hour of us sitting in the car while my dad's going to be talking to this person who just ran into him and has to talk to him about random stuff. So did you feel back then, or do you feel now any kind of remorse that you didn't get all the time because he was in such high demand?
Um, that's such a it's a great question, but it's a hard one to answer because somebody asked me this question once where they were like, "What was it like to have a father like Tim Ellis?" And I'm like, doesn't everybody have a dad like Tim Ellis? I mean, it's the only dad I know, so it's a hard one to answer. I feel I do have this anecdote from when I was probably like, I don't know, 11 or 12, and because my dad was the host of this local music
Right.
TV show, which you see some clips in the film, and I mean, epic 90s hair, just amazing. Um, but I remember we were walking down, like we were at a street fair or something in Portland, and he got stopped by some random guy. I just remember him being really big and kind of grizzly and wearing a tie-dye t-shirt. And he stopped my dad and was like, I know you, I recognize you. And it turned out he knew him from this music, from Electric Surf, from this music TV show he hosted. And they ended up having this long conversation, and I think like you, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, it's par for the course. Like that's kind of what happens when you're out and about doing stuff. Um, but I don't think it was ever anything I resented because he was also so present. Somehow managed to always be. His presence was just always there, even when he wasn't home. To the point where sometimes we're like, "Great, Dad's home. Like now what?" Um, so yeah, and now looking back, it's funny because my relationship with my father, like most people, has evolved over time, and going after music is obviously different from filmmaking, but they have a lot of similarities in terms of like there's no one true career path, or it's not like becoming a doctor where there's like a very prescribed set of things you do before you become a doctor. You become a filmmaker, you become a musician through, I mean, blood, sweat, and tears, and lots of luck, and hard work. But yeah, I feel like as an adult, I actually got to how do I put this? Like my relationship with him evolved in a way where I just feel really lucky that I was able to connect with him as much as I did and learn as much as I did from him. I feel like it might be different if I'd been a bratty teenager and was like, whatever, dad, and then I lost him. Like I had the opportunity to develop this adult relationship with him and had a lot of respect for him and spend a lot of time with him. I lived all over the world for a number of years. I left Portland when I was 17. And I didn't come back until 2014 and got to hang out with my dad. So every couple of weeks we'd meet for lunch. I talked to him about all my crazy shenanigans with work, and he would relate and tell me about all of his crazy shenanigans, and and so I really felt this closeness with him. And so when he got sick, it was terrible and tragic, and I wish it had not happened. Um, but I'm also so thankful for those 2 years that I got to spend with him before we knew that we were going to lose him.
Right.
So yeah, so looking back on my relationship with him and my time with him, I have zero regrets. I don't feel like I had to share him with anybody because he was still there. And he was, hard. He was strict. He had really high expectations, which, was a challenge. But at the same time, I'm so thankful for those lessons and fully appreciate them and embrace them now. Maybe not when I was 16, but now for sure. So I can only count that as a blessing.
One of the real highlights of the film was a tribute concert for your father while he was sick, but still strong enough to be able to attend. And I remember hearing about this event, but I wasn't able to attend in person. Can you just reflect on how much that night meant to both your family and your dad?
Yeah. So it came together really quickly. Aaron Meyer was really the champion of the idea. Because my dad at the time, he didn't have health insurance like most musicians, most freelancers. He didn't have health insurance. He was literally calculating how many gigs he had to play so that he could pay for his CAT scan, which is insane. And so Aaron came up with this idea like, listen, a lot of people want to help and they don't know what to do. And so why don't we put a concert together? So the musicians in town can they can do something that is supportive. Your fans can do something that feels supportive, and we can celebrate you. And of course, my dad was like, because he's not, as much as he's on stage all the time. He's not the kind of guy who seeks out the spotlight. It's not about
Right.
him. Jim Walker actually, he always talked about how my dad loved the playing the notes around the music and around the lyrics, and so my dad would fill in and he would support and that was sort of his personality too. I think he wasn't about being the guy in the spotlight. He was about supporting the guy in the spotlight and making it richer and more supportive. So I think, initially my dad was like, I don't really want to do this, but I know you're going to do it anyway. So fine, figure it out. So as soon as he got the green light, since Aaron got the green light, then of course my dad had a lot of opinions he wanted to share about how he thought it should all run. But I think they put it together in 2 weeks, and it sold out. Revolution Hall, I think, is an 850 plus seat theater, and it sold out in 4 or 5 days. Just a huge amount of support. And Aaron set this fundraising goal. It's like, I think we can raise $100,000 for your dad. And I'm like, you're a dreamer, great. Good luck. I know you're good at fundraising, but I don't know, man. And ended up raising over $150,000. So all of this is happening before the concert even started. So it just felt like a whirlwind. And then that night was just so crazy. And you can see in the footage in the film, it was really moving for my dad. I think he was just really overwhelmed. We were all overwhelmed, but having him on stage and playing, and he was in a lot of pain, which doesn't always come through. But if you compare it to some of his other performances, he was always the guy jumping around and
Yep.
doing his crazy antics on stage. Now he's sitting, and you can tell he's tired. So it was a really big night for him, but it was a really big night for all of us and the family. Like I said before, that was really the first time I'd realized the impact that he made on the local community. It was just gobsmacked, I think is the word. To describe that feeling, where I just literally, the standing ovation at the end, and they sing happy birthday, and I was on stage at the time for the happy birthday part. We walked out. I was holding the cake actually, and just this huge theater with this roaring standing ovation. I mean, it was just incredible. It was incredible. And I think it was Renee, Aaron's wife, who actually was close by and was able to, she filmed on her iPhone my dad's reaction to that moment. So I didn't even get to experience that because I was up on stage. So it was like, you know, yeah, it was beautiful and moving and overwhelming. And, all four of my sisters were there. My brother was in the military at the time and he wasn't able to get leave. So it was the five girls. So, like we're all doing our sister thing and trying to corral each other. And, it was just such a wild night. And I think really, in retrospect, that was the catalyst for me wanting to tell my dad's story. Like that was the night where I realized, like, wow, he's made such a massive impact on so many people. And then I continued hearing those stories in the following months, and that's when I was like, okay, I really want to share this story because he's just impacted so many people. And then to hear that you knew him, and like, I mean, that's just incredible.
You show in the film a little how you became a filmmaker, but what was it that made you want to initially pursue that career in film, and how much of an influence was your dad in that decision?
Yeah. Well, I probably made that decision. I wouldn't say in spite of my dad, but he knew how hard it was going to be to make that work because he'd lived that life, trying to get after it in the music industry. And for me, I was interested in. I mean, I was always telling stories and making little films, and I was, did a couple of arts programs as a kid, and would always enroll in the filmmaking ones. I just liked it as a craft, I guess. If 9-year-olds think about craft, but it was when I was in high school. I was dead set on being a pastry chef. Actually, I'm like 14. I'm going to be the best pastry chef in the world. Um, and then I was working on a school project, and it basically it had evolved into a documentary about the semester. So we were doing this business project, and I had been documenting the whole process throughout. And with filmmaking, you have like what they call a paper cut. It for me, this is I was 16, I think, and it was literally a paper cut. Like I'd handwritten all of my logs, and I literally like cut pieces of paper out and taped it all together. And my dad was working at a recording studio at the time. This is in the mid 90s, and they also had a video suite. And so my dad connected me with their editor, and he goes, okay, like you're all set up. You can go in with your tapes, and he'll actually cut the thing with you. And to me, actually, is the editing process that I love the most, and I still do. I'm not an editor, but I love like crafting the story and taking tens or hundreds or thousands of hours and distilling it into a story. And that was really the first time that I did that, and getting to sit in the edit suite and work with the editor and craft this thing that then became something that I shared with my classmates, and then showed it to my parents, and then here's this like cool thing I made. I just sort of had this realization like, oh, I want to keep doing this. This is really awesome. And so, and I think I tell the story in the film. I come bounding down the stairs one day. I'm like, Dad, I'm going to be a filmmaker. I'm going to make documentaries. I'm going to do just what I did for my civics class, but like for my career. And he's like, okay, well, you're going to need to like network. You're going to need to know people. You're going to need to do da 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 da. What's your backup plan if that doesn't work out? So he got real really quickly. Which of course is a 16-year-old with stars in her eyes, like whatever, Dad. Yeah, exactly. But it was also like important to know. And then another sort of anecdote. I know this is a really long answer, but another anecdote. I worked for a little while. I'd just come back from Oxford. I worked for a year at Leica, which is an animation studio in Portland. And I got laid off. It was like right around the time that the recession was hitting in 2008, 2009. I tried for a while to get a job. Nobody really knew what to do with me because I'd been working as an assistant to the producer, but I also had this Oxford degree. So they're like, where does she, what, what does she want to do? Because, with most producers' assistants, like a producer wants to invest in an assistant who's going to stick around for a while. And obviously they could tell just by talking to me that like I had ambitions with a capital A. So anyway, I ended up, it's a very long story, but I ended up having an opportunity. I've been interviewing with Disney for a job as a production assistant. And it had been going back and forth, like it was looking like it was a possibility that it was going to happen. At the same time, I'd gone back to Australia. I traveled there. I'd made a film there as a student in college. And I had the chance to go back there while, I had all this free time. I was laid off. I couldn't get a job. Tickets to Australia were super crazy cheap. So I'm like, I'm going to go. I've been wanting to go for years. I'm going back. And I had an opportunity to go back there and work on a film with an Aboriginal community in Northeast Queensland in the Australian rainforest. So, like, in retrospect, it's no question. But at the time, I was really conflicted because here's this opportunity I have to go to Australia and do what I really want to do, which is telling stories, working with, for a long time, I was working with Indigenous communities, and it was really something that I was committed to and wanted to do. But it was also a risk because I don't know how I'm really going to be able to support myself and where the money was going to come from. And, the sustainability of that kind of work is something obviously a lot of filmmakers talk about now. And so here's this amazing opportunity, but there's a lot of risk. But then here's this really stable job that's like, yeah, it's starting at the bottom of the ladder, but you start at the bottom and you work your way up. And it's with a great company. And, okay, so what do I do? And I came back to the US and I had this conversation with my dad. I'm like, I just don't know. I don't know what to do. It just seems so, here's a crossroads in my life. What do I do, Dad? And I was probably 28 or something. And there was a special visa I could qualify for in Australia and blah, 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 blah. And he goes, well, what do you think? Will you have the opportunity to do this in Australia again? I said, well, probably not because, I'm about to age out of this visa. And, the film is about working with this elder who's probably not going to be alive for much longer. But at the same time, I don't want to say no to Disney if they come calling, And he just stood there in the doorway. And he goes, well, I don't know, Tiff. Do you think Disney's going to be around a year from now? And I was like, what? And he goes, well, if you have this one chance to go to Australia and you'll be there for a year, so as long as the visa will allow you to be there, will Disney be around when you come back? And I'm like, yeah, of course, Dad, come on. And he goes, well, and this I'll never forget. He goes, well, there you go. And then he walked out the door to go to a gig. And there was just something that was so, I don't know, it's really hard to describe that feeling. But there was just something, he was so assured, like, you take the chance, you take the opportunity. Because sure, the stable stuff is going to be there again in a year from now or 10 years from now, or, if you found a way to have that opportunity, with a company like Disney, you'll find that opportunity again if you need it. But here's this unique chance to do something that you love. And I was actually really surprised by that because he was always preaching, like, be responsible, make good choices, do the right thing. But then looking back in his life and telling the story and in the film, like, he took so many chances and he was always trying to be smart about the things that he was doing, but he took a lot of chances and took advantage of opportunities that came his way. And that's ultimately what he inspired me to do. And, I ended up going to Australia and the film was a total bust, but then that opened up more avenues and I ended up having the most amazing experience of my life. So I think he discouraged it at first, or didn't really discourage it, but was just like, you need to be realistic about what this is. But if you're willing to work hard and get after it, then absolutely 10,000% you should do it. So yeah, that was such a long answer. I'm sorry.
And that's okay. I'm sitting here just having deja vu thinking about it because I went to an aviation school, basically the Oxford of the skies, and then went into the music industry instead. And my dad had some strong opinions about that decision as well. So,
Right.
um, in the course of production of this film, did anything come out that you hadn't known about your dad? Because like when my dad died, we heard from students from decades ago that chimed in with what an impact they'd had in their lives and shared the most remarkable stories about things that we didn't even know about. So, any stories come out that you didn't know that really surprised you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually got asked that question a lot while I was making it. Um, and I would always joke, I'm like, no secret families. Like, there hasn't been some big, mind blowing thing. I mean, the biggest thing for me was just understanding the depth of impact that he had on so many people. And even like a single conversation would turn somebody's, I mean, it sounds really crazy, but like would turn their life around, or it would make them realize, oh, I can do this, um, and become an independent musician and make it work. And um, but none of those things were particularly surprising because I know that he'd had that impact on people in like a smaller sense. It was more like, oh, he's actually impacted more and more people than I ever realized. Um, so yeah, nothing that was like so mind blowing that I'm like, I had no idea. It was just more like he he just impacted a lot of people and more people than I ever thought. Um, and it's humbling because I'm like, it's as his kid, you want to carry on that legacy and try to impact people in a similar way if you can. But sometimes it feels overwhelming because it just seemed like it came so naturally and so easily to him. And I mean, I don't know if I impact anybody from a day to day.
Well, what do you hope that people take away from your film?
I mean, I think big picture, what I hope people take away from the film is that even if it's difficult, you can pursue your passion, and that success doesn't always mean getting the record deal, um, or becoming the famous guy on stage. Having an impactful, purposeful life and pursuing the things that you love. And for my dad, that was music and community and family. Those things are uh, valuable and should be celebrated. And, just having such strong local leaders in our lives are so important. And especially in a world where, you know, however many Instagram likes is somehow, uh, you know, makes people successful. Um, I don't know. I think those everyday heroes and those people who work really hard, to chase after the things that they love, like that's the life worth living, and that's a life worth pursuing, and that's a life of value. Um, so I hope that's the takeaway. Um, yeah.
In the course of making this film, were there any funny behind the scenes stories or bloopers or memorable moments?
Oh gosh, there's so much that we ended up shooting that never made it into the film. Um, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if we had any bloopers, real bloopers. Um, it was more just like sitting and talking story with my dad's friends. So like getting to hear stories of my dad's shenanigans, the 16-year-old in Southern California, and um, just the things that they would get after, and Fritz and Manon, who were early in the film, they were in the band that my dad played with in Alaska. They would always do kind of crazy hijinks because they were living in a hotel in Fairbanks for 6 weeks or something. So there's not a whole lot to do in the 70s. It was more like, here's a picture of your dad basically naked. Ha ha ha. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Those are things I don't need to say. He's still my dad. So it was more that, just like getting to hear stories that, you might not always hear because you're the kid. I got to hear some more of those stories, which is pretty fun. Um, yeah, but that's about it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tiffany. And in addition to being available online all weekend long, people can catch This Is Tim in person at the Ross Rockham Theater here in Klamath Falls on Saturday, September 19th at 3:30 p.m. for the 8th annual Klamath Independent Film Festival. Thank you so much for this fantastic film.
Thank you, Kurt.